Hello, welcome to the week 1 overview video. In this video, I'm going to just kind of walk you guys through everything that I want you to do this week in terms of what I want you to read, the lessons that I want you to study, and then the assignments that I want you to complete. So this video might be a little bit longer than the normal weekly overview videos just because I want to go into as much detail as possible for the first week so that you kind of understand more of what you should do, and then I'll have to go into less detail in the future. So if you're in Blackboard, you can go ahead and go into coursework, and actually if you found this video, you've probably already done this, and then go into week 1, and you'll see the video up here once I post it, and then I'm just going to walk through everything that I want you to do otherwise. Okay, so texts to read. This week I want you to definitely read the Unit 1 chapter content, and we're breaking this class up into 3 units. So we're starting with literature published from 1865 to 1914, and the chapter content that you're going to read for this unit. For these first 3 weeks, we're going to cover this unit. It's going to talk about kind of what was going on in the time period. 1865, the Civil War had just ended, and we have this sort of new understanding of what America is, new ideas of what it means to be American. We also have these new people who are now included as citizens of the United States, and we're talking about people who were once slaves or the children of slaves, and we're also talking about immigrants, and we're talking about the chapter content will cover women and what women were trying to change for themselves in this time period. It will talk about different things, it talks about Darwinism and the survival of the fittest. It talks about a movement about literature and men, and this concept of masculine literature, and this concept of the more masculine man. In the time period, there's this theory that, well, maybe men are becoming too soft because they're not working as hard. There's this overwhelming amount of money that people didn't have before. And so what do people do with their extra income? What kind of leisure activities are they going to have? And there's sort of this discussion throughout the chapter about that. It talks about realism, which is really sort of the central type of writing that we're going to be reading. There's different fields of writing, I guess, different genres of writing. And so here we're looking at realism, and realism is essentially reflecting in writing what's actually going on in the United States. And so, as far as this class in the United States, realism for us in this unit takes 2 different formats. There's sort of the aristocracy realism, so the realism for the rich white people. But then there's also a version of realism which is called naturalism, and it's more of the nitty-gritty. So it's not the what's real for the people with the money who live in the fancy houses. It's what's real for the marginalized voices, African Americans, women, immigrants, Native Americans. And so what's real for these people, not just what's real for the majority. So that's kind of why, the reason I want you to read the chapter content is because I really truly believe that reading the chapter content will help you understand the texts beyond just plot summary. You will understand why the authors are writing what they chose to write. 3 of the texts that are listed here, so you'll see 6 texts, but I want you to pick 3 of them. Now, I've said in a previous video that if you want to get the most out of this class, read all of them, and I don't even assign everything that's in the book. So if you want to get even more out of this class than what I think is are pivotal texts of the time period, read the whole book if you have time to do that. But I understand that not everybody has time to read everything, so I'm not going to assign everything. So pick 3 of these readings, and I'm going to try to, in each of my weekly overview videos, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about each of the readings and discuss the length of the readings, because when I was in college, that mattered. I'm like, okay, pick 3. Well, maybe I'll pick the 3 shortest readings. By no means do I encourage you to do that, but I understand that that's something that people will do. So in terms of the readings, there's 6 of them, and I'm just going to briefly talk about each one. So the first one is Edith by William Dean Howells. It's about 10 pages long, and this is basically a story about a girl who is engaged to a guy, but she kind of says, well, if you want to keep this relationship going, then you need to enlist and go to war. She sort of has these like idealist notions about war and about what a man should do. And her fiance is a conscientious objector, so he disagrees theoretically with the concept of war. He is, I guess, in some ways a pacifist, if you want to think of it like that. So this short story is just about her kind of coming to terms with her own idealism. Our textbook says, in Edith, Howells characteristically explores the moral failure of individuals who have been corrupted by their culture's worst values. And so really maybe the question that Howells is presenting in this text is war morally acceptable? Is assuming that all men should go to war something? Is there a moral question there? So it's something to think about there. This doesn't necessarily depict war. So if that's what you're looking for, this might not be the story for you, but it's about the theory of war and how much we idolize the people who go to war. So it's really interesting, and I actually think that it's still very applicable to today, and it's interpretive. Some people read it and they'll hate it. Some people read it and they'll really like it. The next text that you could choose from is An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. It's about 6 pages, so it's one of our shorter texts. It's a short story about just after the Civil War has ended, a southern plantation owner is going to be put to his death by hanging. So it's sort of an interesting flip, and Bierce is doing this on purpose, very much so. It's an interesting flip on, like slave hangings. Well, now we're hanging a southern plantation owner. His name is Peyton Farquhar, probably. And there's sort of a twist ending. It's interesting what happens. There's sort of a beginning. It talks a little bit about the situation, and then there's a brief flashback. So here's why Farquhar is about to be hung, and then there's some action, and then a twist ending. So it's an interesting story. The textbook says Bierce tells stories of the Civil War stripped of their usual patina of glory and nobility. So, we're not getting this story of like, oh, the Civil War and this like southern beautiful plantation, and all these things are just so wonderful about this time period. This is a story that kind of, I feel like, as it should naturally, shows the bitterness of war. Bierce is trying to bring that out. So something to read if you think that sounds interesting. The Real Thing by Henry James is one of our longer texts, and Henry James is pretty popular. He wrote The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, I think. I think that's the title. It's a short story about an artist who's basically dealing with, like, this couple comes in and they've just lost all of their money, but they were very wealthy, and they need to find a way to get some money. So they're real aristocrats, right? Their last name is Monarch, and they say, hey, well, we will be your models. We represent truly people who come from wealth. So we're the real thing, right? And so he's like, well, yeah, I guess I can hire you. I'll give you a little bit of money. But they end up not being what he needs. And so the artist prefers models that are professional models. They've been modeling for him for a very long time, and he prefers them, but they come from this sort of low class, and James uses spelling and vernacular to kind of express the class of his models, the people that he prefers to model for him. And so then the question becomes, well, what is the real thing? Are the models that are really models the real thing? Or is what you're trying to paint, people who are modeling, who are actually what you're trying to paint, the monarchs, the aristocracy, the upperclassmen, are these really the real thing? So there's sort of this question here. Our textbook says Henry James has an ability to create a landscape of ambiguity and doubt where easy moral judgments become unsettled. So there is sort of this question. There's a question that hangs in the air in this text. And if you like reading about art and an artist's perspective, then maybe this one will be for you. A White Heron by Sarah Orne Jewett. I love Sarah Orne Jewett. She wrote A Country of Pointed Firs. I read it when I was in college, and it is just this beautiful discussion of landscape and how nature is like this living and breathing body, and the way that she describes nature is just so beautiful. And this is reflected in her short story, A White Heron. And this is one of our shorter texts. It's only 7 pages. This text is about a girl who kind of has this moral dilemma. A hunter comes to the area, and this is set in Maine. Most of Jewett's stuff is set in Maine. A hunter comes to the area, and he's like, I'm looking for this white heron, and I'll give anybody who can point me, who can bring me to the heron, I will give them a big chunk of money. And she's this young girl, and she's like, I could really use a lot of money because she's working for her grandmother, and she doesn't have a lot of money. And of course, if you're met with this dilemma, like, well, we all like money. So she's kind of thinking, should I take him to this heron and get a bunch of money? Or is the heron's life kind of really important? And eventually she answers her question. And so she's conflicted. The textbook says a young girl's conflicted loyalties to her conception of herself in nature and to the world of men she will soon encounter are memorably and sensitively drawn. And I think that that's just wonderful, beautifully said about this text. So if you like regionalism, if you like to read about nature, I think that you will like this reading. Now, if you like reading about nature, you'll probably also like To Build a Fire by Jack London. Jack London is one of our integral authors who believes that realism is too like bourgeois. It's too upper class. It's too white. It's too safe. And so he attempts to depict images of like more grit, I think is the way to put it. And To Build a Fire, it's a man versus nature story. An underprepared protagonist, this older man, faces like a ton of snow, freezing temperatures. It's like minus 50 degrees outside. He's in the Yukon, wherever that is. And really he's battling nature at its most extreme. Does he survive? Read it and find out. There's also a husky in this text. So if you like dogs, read this one. From the textbook, literary scholars have begun to re-examine London's body of work, because originally they were like, yeah, his stuff is just kind of lowbrow. It's not very tasteful. It's kind of gross, I think. And so scholars didn't really like Jack London. So they've begun to re-examine his stuff, both for its considerable narrative artistry and the complexity of London's depiction of the world that he inhabited. So he's really just trying to depict and I think most of his characters are male. So he's really trying to depict that hyper masculine, man, go into the woods, do man stuff, like that kind of thing. And he does that in To Build a Fire. And the question is, does man prevail or does nature prevail? I definitely encourage you to seek out the answer to that. Okay, the last text that you can choose from, a little bit of a longer text, is called The Open Boat by Stephen Crane. It's about 16 pages long. It's basically what happens after 4 men survive a shipwreck. Stephen Crane, actually, the author himself, survived a shipwreck, and so it's kind of not a memoir. It is not. It's fiction, but it's based on a true story thing. Hint: one of those 4 dudes dies. So read it and find out who dies. From the textbook, this story reveals Crane's characteristic subject matter: the physical, emotional, and intellectual responses of people under extreme pressure, under nature's indifference to the fate of humanity. Nature doesn't give a crap. It's just nature is nature. It's going to keep on doing its natural thing. And the difficulty of arriving at moral judgment. So, imagine what you have to do to survive. That's kind of what this story is about. And it's kind of written from one guy's perspective, but it's written, I think, in 7 sections and goes through the different, here's what happens right away, here's kind of the chronological aspect of it, and who survives. Read it and find out. So that's sort of our text here. And the reason that I'm bundling these 6 together is because, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff that you do not need to know about. The reason that I'm bundling these together is because I want to give you a sense of, next week we're going to look at feminist texts. The week after that we're going to look at marginalized voices, Native Americans, immigrants, African Americans, post-slavery. But these texts are sort of those big themes that reflect what you will read in the chapter content in terms of moral ambiguity, in terms of dealing with this some things are changing economically with class structures, so we'll see some of that in these readings. The regionalism, the realism, the naturalism, this hyper-masculinity in terms of the naturalism that we're going to read about. So I'm bunching all these things together to get that thematic presence there. So pick 3 that you're interested in reading about. Okay, so the lessons that I want you to study this week, I want you to go through week 1 vocabulary. This is going to reflect a lot of the vocab that you'll find in the chapter content. So I tried to pick words that you will see in the reading this week, the required reading. Summary, paraphrase, and description. Most of you probably are pretty familiar with summary and paraphrase. Maybe you need to know the difference between summary and description. So just take a quick refresher peek through these 3 elements, and they're going to help you. In this lesson, I talk about where does summary play a part in our essays and our responses and our discussion boards. How about paraphrase? How about description? In-text citations for prose is going to be something that I definitely want you to learn about in your responses, in your discussion boards, and in your final essay. You will be citing quotes, and you need to know that when you quote something, you have to have an in-text citation. So if you don't already know how to do MLA in-text citations, please make sure that you study that lesson. How to cite a work in an anthology on a works cited page, same thing. Everything we do is going to be based on the text that we're reading, so we have to cite those. Most importantly are the final 2 lessons, however. So if you choose to, if you're speeding through this week, I really need you to look at the netiquette and discussion boards and questioning the text, because it's really going to explain the types of questions that I'm looking for in the weekly discussion boards. Those questions are open-ended and interpretive and text-based. Don't want questions like, did you like the reading? Did you enjoy this reading? Did you find it funny when this happened? Or what happened when Jack London's protagonist bit his toe off. You know, how much blood came out, right? The types of plot summary questions. You need to ask questions that require your classmates to think deeply about the text, and there might not necessarily be a right answer, which is a really interesting thing and a really good thing. So make sure that you're, at the very least, like, first of all, I want you to look at all of these, but if you can't, please look at netiquette and discussion boards and questioning the text. And then just remember there's a self-assessment quiz at the end of every single one of these. So if there's 6 lessons to study and each one has 2.5 extra credit points, whatever 6 times 2.5 is, that's how many extra credit points you can get. I have no idea what that is. I can't even think off the top of my head what that is. Okay, make sure that you do enrollment verification if you haven't done it already. It's due by Friday, May 25th. If you do not do enrollment verification or anything else in the class, then you will get kicked out. You'll get withdrawn. So take the quiz. I would encourage you, once you do the reading on American Lit 1865 to 1914, pages 1 through 17, to just go ahead and take the quiz. A little bit about the quiz is multiple choice. Blackboard will automatically grade it. You can take it 2 times if you want. When I made the quiz, I went through the chapter once. I realized I didn't have enough questions, so I went through the chapter again. I realized I didn't have enough questions, so I went back and a 3rd time through bits and pieces of the chapter because I almost had enough questions. So if you're one of those studious students that figures out how a quiz is structured, I'm just telling you, it's mostly chronological, and then it gets to a certain point and it starts over, and it gets to a certain point and it kind of starts over a little bit. So just keep that in mind, as if you are like me and took quizzes with the book open, which I encourage, the questions aren't that easy, then just know that you probably have to go through the chapter a couple times. You can take as long as you need to take the quiz. There's no time constraint. You can use your book. The quiz is due Sunday by midnight. And remember, everybody is automatically granted an automatic 24-hour grace period. But after that, please refer back to the late policy. I updated it a couple times, but I think the final is that you cannot turn in anything late. Let's see what Blackboard says. Okay, all assignments will be given a 1-day, 24-hour grace period. Beyond this, no essays, responses, quizzes, self-assessments, or discussion boards will be accepted. So these assignments, the quiz and the discussion board, are due on Sunday, May 27th. And you can turn in on Monday, May 28th, if you forgot about it, if you needed an extra day. But after that, you're done. Okay, so then the final thing that I want you to do this week is your week 1 discussion board. Now, this is going to take me a little bit of time to explain, so bear with me, y'all, but this is the last thing that I need to talk about. This is also due Sunday, May 27th by midnight. But of course, you have a 24-hour grace period, so you can turn it in on Monday. I want you guys to think they're due on Sunday. Due on Sunday. Don't think due on Monday. They'll just mess you up. Due on Sunday. Okay. So you're going to remember, select 3 of those readings that I just went over. And here's what you're going to do. In 3 threads, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. In 3 threads, you're going to post a question about the text. So your initial posts are questions. Don't answer the question yet. You will have to answer one of your questions, but not yet. So just post 3 questions. Remember that I want you to make sure you fully understand the types of questions that I'm looking for within these discussion boards. So I'm not looking for plot summary questions, and I'm not looking for like personal reflections on your evaluation of how good or bad, interesting or not interesting a text was. I am looking for interpretive questions like, what do you think the boat symbolizes in The Open Boat by Stephen Crane? Or what tone of voice is the speaker using in Emily Dickinson's poem? Right? So these are the types of questions that require you to dig into the details and the language and the imagery and the ideas and the themes and all the big things and the details of things in the text, to dig into those and come up with an answer. These answers are going to be subjective because there's not necessarily going to be a right answer. There's just going to be an answer that can very well be supported by the text. Okay, so how many questions do you have to post? 3 questions about 3 different texts. That's why you have to read 3 of the readings. Then, once you've posted your questions, or you could post a question, come back another day, post another question, do what you want, figure it out, however you want to do it. Then I want you to answer one of your own questions and answer one of your classmates' questions. So write a paragraph showing serious contemplation of the reading, quality original thought, going beyond the obvious, and quoted and cited material from the text to prove your point. My suggestion for you guys, when you are coming up with your questions, I would say at least one of your questions should be a question that you are interested in answering, because you have to answer one of your questions. So if you write 3 questions that you hate and you don't want to answer, what good is that? That's not going to help you. If you do that and you realize, oh my gosh, I don't want to answer any of these, just ask a new question. You don't have to delete an old post. It's fine to have multiple, 4, 5, 6 questions if you need to have them. Okay, so in sum, you have 3 original questions about 3 different texts and 2 paragraph responses. One will answer your question, one of your questions, and one will answer a classmate's question. Okay. Make sure that you read through, before you post a question to the discussion board, please read through all the other questions that have been posted so that you're not repeating a question. It's fine to have a question that asks something similar but not totally the same, but you certainly shouldn't have like an identical question or a question that's basically asking the same thing. Hopefully that will encourage you to get to this discussion board early in the week and start posting, but there's no telling. We shall see. Okay, let's see. What else do you need to know? So while you only have to have 5 total posts, 3 questions, and 2 responses, you guys certainly can begin to actually discuss this material. You can go back to other people's questions or answers or responses to your own and continue to respond. I think that will make for the most interesting and beautiful discussion. Do I expect you to do that? No, it's not a requirement. Most people do not go beyond the requirements, but that is something that, if you want to get the most out of this class, then you'll do that. Okay, so here's the rubric. And these discussion boards are always worth 50 points. 18 points, you're going to ask a question. Points are given based on the quality and thoughtfulness of these questions. So if you ask a type of question that's like, did you enjoy reading The White Heron? You're not going to get any points for that question. Okay. If you ask a question like, one of the sample questions that I just talked about that I can't find, then you'll get your full points for a question. If you ask a question that's mostly plot summary but has a little bit of interpretation, you might get half the points. You might get almost all the points. And I'll give you an explanation for why you got not. If you don't get all the points, I'll explain why. Then 16 points, you answer one of your own questions. Again, I'm looking at serious contemplation of the reading, quality original thought beyond just like this obvious thing, and then quoted and cited material from the text to prove your point. And then another 16 points are given for the answer to your classmate's question. What I really want to stress here is that we are in a period of time where, and we're using a textbook where most of our readings, people are analyzing on the internet. And there's just junk all over the internet. I want you to find an answer, find questions and find answer to these questions in your brain. Please, please do not go searching for answers Don't go searching for questions. Don't go searching for answers on the internet. If your answer too closely resembles something that's on the internet, I will give you a 0 for plagiarism. I can tell the difference between you came up with this answer on your own and you found it on Schmoop or, I don't know, Wikipedia or some other website that talks about literature. I really can. I can tell the difference. Even if you're saying something very similar, the language is just going to be clear. It's going to be easy for me to understand whether you came up with this in your brain or whether you did a quick Google search. So what does that mean? That means start the discussion boards early, start the readings early. I know I'm saying this like 30 minutes into the video. Y'all probably stop watching. So please just don't go searching for anything on the internet. You do not need the internet except for to do this class. Okay, I think that covers everything that I want to say. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I would be happy to talk more about the readings. I'd be happy to talk more about these assignments. If you're like, hey, is this a good question? Is this what you mean? Email me that. I will tell you yes or no or maybe. All right, y'all. Have a good week. Talk to you next time.